So I'm in Maldon, central Victoria, and this is another gold mining town with a lot of history on display. And people know about a lot of the main things. You've got a fantastic dredge by the highway here that was in an earlier video. You've got a main street that is really well preserved. It looks like part of the 1880s, 1890s. You could throw dirt on the street, shoot a Western movie there if you moved the cars out. There's a steam train, there's lots of cool things to see, but what about the attractions people don't know about and no one cares about? So I'm going to show you 5 things in Maldon that you've probably not heard of. I won't quite call them secret, but this is 5 less known historic sites in Maldon. Come along, enjoy the ride. We'll show you that main street on the way. So this is the fire tower on Mount Tower Gap. Now, basically fire towers are observation posts that are used today to monitor for smoke and fire danger, and it's quite high fire danger today. It's staffed, it's the correct term. It's quite big. If you look at it closely though, you might think it looks a little bit familiar because the frame it's sitting on is quite older than the tower, and it's actually an old mine poppet head. So this is the framework, the head frame, the poppet head as we would say, from the Comet mine in Bendigo. And in the 1920s, it was bought up by the local community, by a group of people. It was dismantled from its spot just to North Bendigo on Hustlers Reef, and it was put on a train bit by bit, brought out here to Maldon and brought up the hill on bullock drays, which must have been quite a lot of work, but I think they were used to moving heavy things around back then, so probably not so hard for them. And it was done as a tourist attraction. The car industry was a brand new thing. Moto touring, driving around, seeing places in your car was a new industry, and putting a great big tower you could drive to on a day trip seemed a way to bring people into Maldon, which was also, like everywhere else, not really making money out of mining anymore. So basically, later on, this would become a fire tower, but it still serves its purpose. I've come here, I've seen the tower, I'm going to go buy coffee later. So it's still working in that way. But originally a tourist attraction, and it still has quite a spectacular view. But yeah, now a fire tower. Anyway, this is the Tower and Gower lookout. Not sure if you're picking up my level of trepidation about some of these timbers. That's quite a drop. So the tower's repurposed. It's still here, obviously, to climb for tourists, like I just did. Repurposed as a fire spotting tower in summer now. So that's site number one, the former Comet mine, Poppet Head, as a tourist attraction. So site number two is actually on a different hill. This is Anzac Hill, the other side of Maldon, a little further down from where we were at the fire tower. This whole hill was set up as a memorial after the First World War, and it was planted with trees and probably had a lovely little garden. We've actually got a captured Turkish gun here that's ended up on the other side of the planet. Kind of amazing how these things traveled around. And if I can find some story about it, I'll probably cross to Whiteboard Ben, he'll explain it. But we're not actually here for First World War history, we're here for Second World War history. And we just need to go down this way a little bit. If you go back to the dark days of 1941, Singapore had fallen. The Americans had been attacked at Pearl Harbor, and they were retreating from the Pacific at that point. And there wasn't very much between us and the Japanese. Bearing in mind, most of our army was in North Africa fighting the Italians and the Germans. And we had little to defend. And in 41, the situation was pretty serious, and the government was actually looking at the prospect of fighting a war on the Australian mainland. Circumstances changed. The Americans got the upper hand in the war. Japanese supply lines got stretched, and the Imperial Army was turned back at Kokoda. But for a while, it looked like we'd be fighting here, and the government was preparing. And this is one of thousands of volunteer-run aircraft observation posts that were set up across Australia. Most of them were set up within 100 miles of major cities, and we're within 100 miles of Melbourne. They were staffed by volunteers. Most of them were women. They were trained in aircraft identification. Presumably they had a radio and some other equipment here. And I'm guessing that's our antenna mast over here. That would make sense. Speculating. Over here, that would have made sense. And you can see this is a good little spot. Like, imagine the trees aren't there, but we've got right across through to Mount Alexander this way. We can see the entire valley that way. And through around to the other side, we've got a fairly big observation. And I'd imagine there'd be some more on the other side. And this was based on a system they'd used in the UK that supplemented the radar. Everyone knows about the radar system, but it was supplemented by thousands of observers there, and we were replicating that process here. This is pretty cool, little piece of Second World War history. The only thing I don't really understand is why they didn't use the fire tower. But, don't know. Anyway, maybe it was too obvious. The shed's been recreated, but this is apparently what it was. Would have been hot here in summer. Anyway, Second World War aircraft observation point on Anzac Hill. Item number 3 is a bit of an oddity. If you look at this map of Maldon, this is just the side. This is the main street through here, and High Street coming this way. This is Chapel Street. This is the former Uniting Church, and prior to that, the former Methodist Church, I believe. That might be relevant, so we'll come back to that. This is Chapel Street, and this lane through here comes up here and joins to Fountain Track. Now, what we're having a look at is just here in this area here, and it doesn't really, it's probably that little mark there, it doesn't really show up in this image. But it's actually a grave. There is a solitary grave in this little laneway at the side of Maldon. And so here it is, tucked away in a quiet laneway between a couple of houses, just in a street on its own. A very, very old grave, 1850s. It's the grave of a young mother and her infant child, quite sadly. So I didn't want to film too much of the graveside because it's right next to houses and it's a bit early in the morning. It's a hot day. That was the grave of Elizabeth Ansett. She was 27 when she died. She had just immigrated to Australia with her family. There's a couple of different accounts online, but apparently she had travelled by ship to South Australia. Sounds like the ship might have actually been run aground or shipwrecked in South Australia, and it wasn't uncommon for people to come to Victoria through South Australia for taxation reasons, believe it or not. It was cheaper to land in the colony of South Australia than Victoria, and apparently cheap enough that it made walking worthwhile. So her family decided to walk from South Australia to the Victorian goldfields. Now, if you look at a map, that's a horrendous distance. It must have taken a long, long time. It must have taken weeks. The accounts online suggest that Elizabeth got dysentery, got sick, and she unfortunately died shortly after arriving here in Maldon. Buried with her is an unnamed 14-day-old child. So quite a tragic story. Like, these people, they had difficult lives. It's a bit depressing. But anyway, something to think about next time you're sipping your latte and it's a bit too hot. So how did this grave end up being in a laneway on its own? So there's an account on the Central Goldfields Guide that says the grave is an original grave from the Mount Tarrangower Cemetery. It was at the back corner of the Methodist Church, the building which is still there. It survived, it was in a laneway, and the rest of the headstones were relocated to Castlemaine Cemetery at Campbell's Creek. So it seems likely that it's not the only grave here, but it's the only one that wasn't disturbed and wasn't removed, or the headstones removed. It seems there was probably a few graves in the cemetery in addition to this one, but this one purely fell on public land, so it was left intact as it was. It's interesting, the attitudes to graves have changed over the times. You know, there's a lot of places where old cemeteries, in Bendigo, for example, turn into car parks. The Victoria Market in Melbourne's over the top of the old city cemetery there. Many of the graves are still intact underneath. We'd never think of doing that today, but in this era, it wasn't such an uncommon thing. Okay, I'm just off the main road here behind me. The shops are up here. And we've got here quartz kilns. Now, quartz kilns are part of the mining process. Here in Maldon, like in most of central Victoria, the gold, or a lot of the later gold, was in deep quartz reefs underground. So as part of the extrication process, they'd normally bring the quartz up, crush it, process it to extract the gold. Not a rockologist, and I can't tell you the whole process in detail. What seems to be different about Maldon is that there was a practice of firing the quartz. So they would heat it up in kilns. And here's some of the kilns. And there's a few spots like this in Maldon. Superheating the quartz before they crushed it made it easier to process. However, it added another step in the quartz processing. And it doesn't seem to have been a popular technique outside of Maldon, but it was used here a fair bit. So there's a number of these old quartz kilns in town. You can see they're quite an industrial scale. So I think we've got 4 here. Because there'd be a process of setting it up, heating it, running it, cleaning it out, prepping it for the new fire. So if you want a continuous stream of quartz, you had to have multiple going at the same time. So kind of unique to Maldon, quartz kilns. Anyway, site number 4. So this is site number 5, and this is the former state battery. Now, a state battery in this case is not some communist leftist plot to provide clean energy for the estate. It's actually a battery in the old sense of a crush. So basically they would bring quartz here to be crushed up to process to extract the gold. There's a few places in the goldfield where the government saw to establish its own battery, basically to support the industry and keep it going, which I guess is a little communist, but it seemed to be a good idea in this case. A lot of the local mines were tributaries or operated as tributaries, so someone would own a lease or own a mine, and they'd rent part of that out, or even a level of the mine out as a tribute, and another company, group, individual would come and operate that smaller thing, which was a safer way. If you owned the mining lease, it was much safer. You wouldn't run the risk of not getting money, but at the same time you'd have reduced profits. The risk was all on the people who took out the tenancy, basically. The result of that was they were often smaller operators and they couldn't afford to set up crushing equipment and big expensive items like this. So they'd be at the mercy of other operators, or if there was no crush, potentially the whole industry could shut down. So there's a number of points in the goldfield where the government set up its own crush, and this was one of them. This was a state battery at Maldon. It's actually really intact because it was operating up into the 90s at points. I think that's off and on, but it last operated in the 1990s. So yeah, in my lifetime. That's a bit weird, but anyway, here it is, Maldon State Battery, and very intact. Well worth a look. I'll have a peek in some of the windows. We'll see what we can see. Yep. I'm doing it. Don't say I don't do things for you. Try around here. Well, I think we know what this is. I won't show you that. Okay, no entry here. I'm trying to work out, and feel free to comment if you've got an idea, why exactly they're so keen to keep us out of this spot. Are they worried about the chimney? Oh, it's a little lean at the top. Maybe that's the issue. I don't know. It seems an odd spot to be protecting. And it looks safe, but I'm going to take their word for it because that's always best. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Site number 5, the Maldon State Battery. So, hope you've enjoyed it. Maldon is one of those places, a lot of the goldfields history is still here because it didn't become a Bendigo or a Ballarat and have 100,000 people living here today. It's a cool little town though, and I'd encourage you to come and have a visit. Drive out here. It's not too far from Melbourne. It's not too far from Bendigo, Ballarat, Castlemaine. Come and have a coffee, support the economy, have a good time. We'll see you in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this.